Well, there's a risk of race riots returning to St. Louis in the United States after police shot dead an 18-year-old black man. They've already been clashes in the area where it happened. Well, demonstrators surrounded the site of the shooting, launching firecrackers. They even tried to set fire to a gas station. 4 people were arrested. Local police say Antonio Martin was shot after he pointed a gun at an officer. James Klein, a producer from RT's Rupley video agency, visited the scene.
There was a rush of people going back and forth. There was a group that actually took a car and threw rocks against, broke the windows, that car having to be towed away. A female was carried away shortly after the explosion. It's unclear what the extent of her injuries were, but she seemed to be fairly close to where the rocket detonated, thrown obviously from the crowd into or against one of the fuel pumps at the gas station. The police had the foresight of shutting down the valves to those gas pumps earlier, which possibly prevented further damage to the station, including a larger explosion. There was a crowd of about 250 to 300 people on the scene, confronting about 75 police officers, fairly outnumbered. The police were trying to control and keep the crime scene uncontaminated, and so they formed a perimeter around the area, and the protesters, of course, breaking the tape and trying to engage the police, who at all costs were trying to maintain the order of the scene, the crime scene.
Well, police have now released CCTV videos showing Antonio Martin pulling out a handgun. He pointed it at the officer, who then fired 3 times. Political analyst Eric Draitser says each incident sparks further public anger.
The protests are not about individual and isolated events or incidents, that rather the protests are a reaction against what the people perceive to be deeply rooted, deeply embedded, institutionalized racism in the United States. We're talking about major American cities with major demographic issues, demographics that show massive portions of the city are African American, massive portions of the city that see the police as an occupying force, not as one that's there to protect them. And so you have to address a sociological phenomenon before you can start any high-minded talk about reform.
Well, protests have also reignited in New York over the recent string of killings at the hand of police. Hundreds of demonstrators blocked major streets on Tuesday to make their voices heard over the deaths of Michael Brown and Eric Garner. Public frustration over their killings increased after grand jury decisions not to charge the officers in either of these high-profile cases. Well, protests against police brutality have flared up nationwide over the past few months. Well, 2 particular hashtags and slogans have become rallying cries. Black Lives Matter appeared after a white officer shot dead unarmed black teenager Mike Brown in Ferguson, near the scene of the latest shooting, while I Can't Breathe were the last words of Eric Garner, who was put in a fatal chokehold while being questioned by police. The protesters want officers who kill unarmed civilians to be punished, even if judges don't agree. In another case, at the start of this week, it was decided that a policeman in Milwaukee won't face criminal charges for shooting dead a black man who had schizophrenia. My colleague Kevin Owen spoke to Mandela Barnes, who's a state representative for Wisconsin, and he believes officers should be charged for killing unarmed civilians.
Mistakes do happen, but in this case, lethal force was used and a life was lost, which is why he no longer has his job. And in that sense, in performing his job as a police officer and failing to do so appropriately, a life was lost. And so in that sense, yes, I do feel that there is some sort of negligence, there is some sort of criminal penalty that should come along with that.
Darren Wilson, who shot Michael Brown, he wasn't brought to book either. Should he have been?
Yeah, Darren Wilson, of course. Of course, Darren Wilson should have at least stood trial. you know, let it play out in court. The fact that these district attorneys are choosing not to file charges is showing an extreme disconnect with the people and communities across America. Not putting faith in the judicial process is not playing out well for the victims. It's not playing out well for the victim's family. It's not playing out well for the perception that people in communities of color have of law enforcement.
Well, we're closely following the tensions between police and protesters across the US. All the latest images and videos are also available on our YouTube channel.